The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest as I stood in the pristine showroom of Henderson Luxury Motors. My oil-stained coveralls, a stark contrast to the gleaming marble floors beneath my worn work boots. "You're fired, Sarah," my Uncle Marcus sneered, his voice echoing off the cathedral ceiling of what had once been my grandfather's pride and joy. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you out and don't even think about coming back. This dealership has no place for grease monkeys who can't remember their station. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The humiliation burned through me as every salesperson in their pressed suits turned to stare, their expressions ranging from pity to poorly concealed satisfaction. I had worked in the service bay of Henderson Motors for 6 years, ever since I was 18, believing that my dedication and mechanical expertise would eventually earn me the respect and recognition I deserved. Instead, I was being thrown out like yesterday's trash because I had dared to question why Marcus was selling off the vintage car collection my grandfather Samuel Henderson had spent 40 years building. But what my power-hungry uncle didn't know was that Grandpa Sam had left me one final surprise, hidden in a place only I would think to look. A discovery that would turn the entire Henderson family legacy upside down and transform me from dismissed mechanic to the owner of the very empire that had just cast me aside. The morning had started like any other Tuesday at Henderson Luxury Motors, the flagship dealership that had anchored downtown Millbrook for over 4 decades. I arrived at 6:30, 2 hours before the showroom opened, because that's when I did my best work in the quiet solitude of the service bay. The familiar scent of motor oil and the gentle hum of fluorescent lights had always been my sanctuary, a place where I felt competent and valued, despite the constant reminders from my uncle and cousins that I was somehow lesser than the rest of the Henderson family. My grandfather Samuel Henderson had founded the dealership in 1982, starting with a small lot selling used cars and gradually building it into the premier luxury auto destination in our corner of Ohio. BMW, Mercedes, Audi, Lexus. If it was German or Japanese engineering at its finest, Grandpa Sam sold it. More importantly, he understood cars not just as status symbols, but as mechanical marvels, deserving of respect and proper care. That's why he had always maintained the most comprehensive service department in the region, staffed with certified technicians who shared his passion for automotive excellence. I had inherited that passion from him, spending countless hours as a child in the service bay, while my mother worked the front desk and my Uncle Marcus learned the sales floor. Grandpa Sam would lift me up so I could peer into engine compartments, explaining how each component worked together in perfect harmony. "A car is like a symphony, little Sarah," he would say, his weathered hands gentle as he guided mine to feel the smooth operation of a perfectly tuned engine. "Every part has to play its role precisely, or the whole performance falls apart." By the time I was 12, I could diagnose most engine problems by sound alone. By 16, I was rebuilding transmissions under Grandpa Sam's proud supervision. When I graduated high school, there was never any question about my future. I would work at Henderson Motors, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up, eventually taking my place in the family legacy alongside my uncle and his 2 sons, my cousins Derek and Brandon. That had been the plan anyway. Reality proved far more complicated. My Uncle Marcus had never quite understood my grandfather's philosophy about cars or business. Where Grandpa Sam saw craftsmanship and long-term relationships with customers, Marcus saw profit margins and quarterly growth targets. Where my grandfather valued the skilled technicians who kept his customers' vehicles running perfectly, Marcus viewed the service department as a necessary expense that detracted from the real money made in new car sales and financing. The tension between their approaches had simmered for years, carefully managed while Grandpa Sam remained active in the business. But when he suffered his heart attack 8 months ago, Marcus had wasted no time implementing his vision of modernization and efficiency. Experienced technicians found themselves replaced by cheaper, less skilled workers. Service appointments were rushed to maximize throughput. The customer lounge, once a comfortable space where people could relax while their cars received attentive care, was transformed into a high-pressure sales environment, where service advisors pushed unnecessary repairs and expensive upgrades. Most painfully for me, Marcus had begun systematically dismantling Grandpa Sam's vintage car collection, the crown jewel of the dealership that had drawn enthusiasts from 3 states. These weren't just old cars, they were automotive history preserved in running condition. A 1967 Shelby Cobra that Grandpa Sam had restored himself. A pristine 1955 Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing that had belonged to a Hollywood legend. A 1973 Porsche 911 Carrera RS that represented the pinnacle of German engineering from that era. Each sale felt like watching Marcus tear pages from a history book, trading irreplaceable heritage for quick cash infusions that he claimed were necessary for dealership modernization. But I knew better. The vintage collection had always been profitable, drawing collectors and enthusiasts, who often became customers for new vehicles as well. Marcus was liquidating it not out of necessity, but out of his fundamental misunderstanding of what made Henderson Motors special. This morning I had made the mistake of voicing that opinion. I was working on a particularly challenging repair, a 2019 BMW M5, with an intermittent electrical issue that had stumped two other technicians. The diagnostic computer showed no fault codes, but I could hear the subtle irregularity in the fuel pump's operation that suggested a failing relay hidden somewhere in the complex wiring harness. It was exactly the kind of problem that required patience, experience, and genuine mechanical intuition, qualities that Marcus's efficiency-focused approach was systematically eliminating from the service department. As I traced circuits with my multimeter, I overheard Derek and Brandon discussing their father's latest plan to sell the Shelby Cobra to a collector in California. The number they mentioned, $250,000, was substantial, but I knew the car was worth at least twice that to the right buyer. More importantly, it represented the heart of Grandpa Sam's collection, the vehicle he had spent 5 years restoring to Concours' condition as a labor of love rather than commercial enterprise. "He's making a mistake," I said, not looking up from my work but speaking loudly enough for my cousins to hear. "That Shelby is the centerpiece of the whole collection. Grandpa Sam always said it was the car that brought people in the door, that got them excited about automotive passion before they ever considered buying something new." Derek, 26 and already developing the soft features that came from too many client lunches and not enough physical work, laughed dismissively. "Sarah, you're a mechanic. You fix cars. Leave the business decisions to people who understand numbers and market dynamics." The condescension in his voice, so reminiscent of his father's attitude toward my role in the family business, triggered something in me that had been building for months. I set down my tools and turned to face both my cousins, these men who had been handed management positions based solely on their gender and last name, while I remained relegated to the service bay despite my superior knowledge of both automobiles and customer relationships. "I understand numbers perfectly well," I replied evenly. "I also understand that you're about to sell a $250,000 car for half its actual value to generate quick cash that this dealership doesn't need. The service department alone has been more profitable this year than new car sales, despite your father's efforts to undermine it. And I understand that Grandpa Sam specifically told me that collection was never supposed to be broken up, that it represented the soul of what he built here." Brandon, the younger cousin at 24 but already displaying the same arrogant presumption as his older brother, stepped closer with an expression of theatrical disbelief. "Are you seriously claiming Grandpa Sam gave you special instructions about the business? You're a technician, Sarah. A good one, maybe, but you're not family management. You never have been and you never will be." The statement revealed everything about how they viewed my place in the Henderson hierarchy. Despite sharing their grandfather's blood, despite working in the business longer than either of them, despite having mechanical skills they couldn't begin to match, I would always be relegated to second-class status, because I wore coveralls instead of suits, and understood carburetors better than cash flow projections. "Maybe not," I replied, my voice gaining strength as anger overcame years of ingrained deference. "But I understand what this place meant to him. Every car in that collection has a story, a reason he chose it and preserved it. You're treating automotive history like commodity inventory, and it's exactly the kind of short-sighted thinking that's already driving away our longtime customers." That's when Marcus appeared, having apparently been listening from the doorway of his office overlooking the service bay. His expression carried the cold fury of a man unaccustomed to having his decisions questioned, particularly by someone he clearly viewed as an employee rather than family member, despite our shared DNA. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying across the service bay with unmistakable authority, My office. Now. The walk across the service bay felt like a march to execution, with every technician and service advisor suddenly finding urgent tasks that required their complete attention. I had challenged the established hierarchy, questioned the wisdom of the man who now controlled every aspect of the family business, and everyone knew that such insubordination would not be tolerated. Marcus's office occupied the prime real estate on the dealership's second floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, providing a commanding view of both the service bay and the showroom floor below. The walls displayed his various sales awards and photographs with local politicians and business leaders, a shrine to his vision of success that notably excluded any mention of the mechanical expertise or automotive passion that had built the foundation for his achievements. "Sit down," he commanded, not looking up from the papers spread across his mahogany desk. The deliberate delay, forcing me to wait while he finished reading what appeared to be sales reports, was a calculated power play designed to reinforce the dynamic he was about to make explicit. When he finally looked up, his expression carried no trace of familial warmth or even basic respect. This was a boss addressing a problematic employee, nothing more. "Your little outburst downstairs was completely inappropriate and unprofessional. You questioned my business decisions in front of my sons and disrupted the work environment with your uninformed opinions about matters that are frankly above your pay grade." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "The vintage collection represents," I began, but he cut me off with a sharp gesture. "The vintage collection represents capital assets that need to be converted to cash for dealership modernization. Period. Your grandfather's sentimental attachment to old cars was a luxury we could afford when this business was smaller and less competitive. Today's market requires different priorities and more sophisticated management approaches than maintaining a museum of automotive nostalgia." The casual dismissal of everything Grandpa Sam had valued, the reduction of his life's passion to mere sentimentality, ignited something fierce within me. Those cars bring customers in the door. They establish our reputation as serious automotive enthusiasts rather than just another sales operation. Grandpa Sam understood that emotional connection drives long-term customer loyalty better than any advertising campaign. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, studying me with the expression of someone observing a particularly stubborn child. "Sarah, you're 24 years old with a high school education and 6 years of experience changing oil and replacing brake pads. I have an MBA from Case Western and 20 years of experience building this dealership into the most profitable automotive operation in the region. Your opinions about business strategy are not relevant to operational decisions. The systematic diminishment of my contributions, the deliberate minimization of my skills and knowledge, revealed the fundamental problem that had been festering since Grandpa Sam's death. In Marcus's vision of Henderson Motors, there was no place for someone like me, someone who understood cars as more than mere products, who valued craftsmanship and customer relationships over quarterly profit margins, who represented the values and principles that had originally made the business successful. Furthermore," he continued, his tone growing increasingly cold, "your attitude and behavior have become disruptive to dealership operations. Several staff members have complained about your tendency to question established procedures and your apparent belief that you should have input into management decisions. That level of insubordination cannot be tolerated in any professional environment." I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized where this conversation was heading. The charges were completely fabricated. I had always maintained positive relationships with my fellow technicians and had never been anything but professional in my interactions with dealership staff. But Marcus was constructing a narrative that would justify what he had apparently already decided to do. "Therefore," he said, reaching into his desk drawer to retrieve a pre-prepared document, "your employment with Henderson Motors is terminated effective immediately. You'll receive 2 weeks severance pay and a reference letter confirming your technical competence. But your access to dealership facilities ends today." The words seemed to echo in the sudden stillness of the office, their finality hitting me like a physical blow. 6 years of dedicated work, of proving myself in a traditionally male-dominated field, of building relationships with customers who specifically requested my expertise for their automotive needs. All of it dismissed with bureaucratic efficiency by a man who viewed me as an obstacle to his vision of corporate modernization. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This dealership has been my life since I was 18. I know these customers, their cars, their service histories. I'm one of your most experienced technicians." "Were," Marcus corrected with visible satisfaction. "You were an employee. Now you're trespassing on private property. Derek will escort you to collect your personal tools and then off the premises. Any attempt to return will result in criminal charges." The humiliation was complete and deliberately public. Derek appeared in the office doorway as if summoned by some invisible signal, his expression mixing embarrassment with unmistakable relief that the family hierarchy was being reinforced. Leading me through the service bay to collect my toolbox while every colleague watched in stunned silence felt like the ultimate degradation, a final demonstration that challenging Marcus's authority would not be tolerated regardless of the challenger's qualifications or family connections. My hands shook as I gathered the tools I had carefully collected over 6 years of professional development. Each wrench, each diagnostic instrument, each specialty tool represented investments in my expertise and career advancement. Now they felt like artifacts from a life that had just ended, remnants of a future that had been snatched away because I had dared to defend my grandfather's legacy against those who viewed it as inconvenient sentiment. The worst part was the silence from my fellow technicians. These were men who had worked alongside me for years, who had learned to respect my diagnostic skills and mechanical intuition, who had often sought my advice on challenging repairs. Now they avoided eye contact, their discomfort palpable as they witnessed my professional execution. Whether their silence stemmed from self-preservation or genuine agreement with Marcus's decision, the result was the same. I was utterly alone in my humiliation. Derek walked me to the employee parking lot behind the dealership, his presence ensuring that I couldn't linger or attempt any final appeals to reason. My ancient Honda Civic, with its mismatched fender and carefully maintained engine, looked pathetic next to the luxury vehicles that filled the customer lot. The contrast seemed to summarize everything about my place in the Henderson family hierarchy: functional but unimpressive, reliable but ultimately disposable. "Sarah," Derek said as I loaded my toolbox into the Civic's trunk, his voice carrying what might have been genuine regret, "this isn't personal. Dad's under a lot of pressure to improve profitability, and he needs everyone focused on the same objectives. Your opinions about the vintage collection were becoming a distraction." I turned to face him, studying the soft features and manicured appearance of someone who had never spent a day doing physical work, who had been handed a management position based entirely on genetics rather than competence. "Those cars meant everything to Grandpa Sam. He spent 40 years building that collection, and your father is destroying it for short-term cash." Derek shrugged, apparently unmoved by appeals to family history or automotive passion. "Sentimental value doesn't appear on balance sheets, Sarah. Dad's trying to build a modern automotive business, not maintain a museum. Maybe you'll understand that perspective better when you've gained some real business experience." The patronizing dismissal, treating my 6 years of intimate involvement with the dealership as somehow less valuable than his 2 years of sales floor management, crystallized everything that was wrong with the family dynamic that had emerged since Grandpa Sam's death. Technical expertise, customer relationships, and institutional knowledge were being systematically devalued in favor of MBA-driven efficiency and profit maximization that ignored the foundational elements that had made Henderson Motors successful in the first place. As Derek returned to the dealership, leaving me alone in the parking lot with my demolished career and shattered sense of belonging, I felt a rage building that transcended mere professional disappointment. This was about justice, about family loyalty, about preserving something meaningful against those who saw only dollar signs, where others saw passion and craftsmanship. I sat in my car for several minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel as I tried to process the magnitude of what had just happened. 24 years old, unemployed, with skills that were highly specialized but might not translate easily to other opportunities in our small Ohio city. The automotive repair industry was notoriously difficult for women, and my association with Henderson Motors had been both my greatest credential and my primary identity. More than the practical concerns about my immediate future, though, was the deeper wound of betrayal. I had believed that family meant something, that shared blood and common history created obligations and loyalties that transcended mere business relationships. Grandpa Sam had always treated me as a valued member of the Henderson legacy, encouraging my mechanical interests and promising that dedication and competence would eventually be rewarded with recognition and responsibility. Instead, I had discovered that family membership was apparently conditional on gender, on willingness to accept subordinate status, on never challenging the authority of men who viewed the business as their exclusive domain, regardless of their qualifications or understanding of what made it successful. But as I drove home through the familiar streets of Millbrook, passing the small houses and modest businesses that comprised our working-class community, something else began emerging alongside the anger and hurt. A memory of something Grandpa Sam had told me just weeks before his death, a cryptic comment that had seemed like rambling from a man whose medication sometimes affected his clarity of thought. "Sometimes the most important gifts can't be wrapped in pretty paper, little Sarah," he had said during one of our last conversations in the hospital. "Sometimes they have to be hidden where only the right person will think to look for them. You remember that workshop I set up behind the old garage? The one where I taught you to rebuild your first engine?" I had assumed he was simply reminiscing about our shared mechanical projects, lost in nostalgic memories of happier times. But now, with the benefit of devastating hindsight, his words seemed to carry different implications. Grandpa Sam had always been strategic in his thinking, always planning several moves ahead in both business and family matters. The idea that he might have anticipated the conflicts that would emerge after his death, that he might have prepared for exactly the scenario that had just unfolded, suddenly seemed not just possible but probable. The workshop he had mentioned was a small building behind his house, separate from the main garage where he had restored the vintage cars now being liquidated by Marcus. It had been our private space, where he had taught me advanced mechanical techniques away from the distractions and interruptions of the dealership environment. We had spent countless hours there together, working on personal projects and experimental repairs that pushed the boundaries of conventional automotive wisdom. I hadn't been back to that workshop since his funeral, the emotional weight of the memories too painful to confront while grieving his loss. But now, with nowhere else to turn and nothing left to lose, the possibility that he might have left something there, some guidance, some resource, some tool for navigating the crisis I now faced, seemed worth investigating. The drive to Grandpa Sam's house took me through the older section of Millbrook, where tree-lined streets were anchored by modest homes built in the 1940s and 1950s for returning veterans and their growing families. His house, a simple two-story colonial with a detached garage and workshop, sat on a corner lot that had provided enough space for his automotive projects without disturbing the neighbors. The property had been empty since his death, tied up in estate proceedings that Marcus was handling with his characteristic focus on efficiency and profit maximization. The main house would likely be sold to fund dealership expansions, while the garage and workshop would probably be demolished to maximize the lot's development potential. Everything Grandpa Sam had built, both personal and professional, was being systematically converted to cash by a man who valued only the financial components of his father's legacy. I parked in the familiar driveway, noting how quickly the property was showing signs of neglect without Grandpa Sam's meticulous maintenance. The lawn needed cutting, the flower beds were being overtaken by weeds, and the workshop's paint was beginning to peel in places where weather had found vulnerable spots. It was heartbreaking to see his pride and joy falling into disrepair, another casualty of Marcus's priorities and timeline. The workshop key was hidden in the same place it had always been, under a loose brick near the foundation where Grandpa Sam had shown me to look when I was 12 years old. The familiarity of the gesture, the unchanged nature of his security system despite everything else that had been transformed since his death, brought unexpected tears to my eyes as I turned the key and stepped into the space that had been our shared sanctuary. Everything was exactly as he had left it. Tools arranged with military precision on pegboards that had been carefully labeled and organized. The engine hoist positioned near the main workbench where we had tackled our most ambitious projects. The rolling tool cabinet that contained his most prized instruments, each one carefully maintained and stored in its designated location. Even the smell was unchanged. Motor oil and metal polish, and the faint aroma of the pipe tobacco he had enjoyed during our longer working sessions. For several minutes, I simply stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the flood of memories this space contained. Every tool had a story. Every project surface held the ghost of some mechanical challenge we had solved together. This workshop represented the best of my relationship with Grandpa Sam, the hours when his full attention was focused on teaching me everything he knew about automotive engineering and craftsmanship. But I was here for a specific purpose, seeking whatever guidance or resource he might have left for exactly this situation. I began searching systematically, checking the obvious places first: desk drawers, filing cabinets, storage boxes, looking for anything that might explain his cryptic comments about gifts hidden where only the right person would think to look. The search revealed the expected items: repair manuals, technical specifications, parts catalogs organized by make and model. But nothing that seemed relevant to my current crisis. Nothing that offered guidance for dealing with family betrayal or professional devastation. I was beginning to think that grief and medication had indeed affected his clarity when I noticed something unusual about the main workbench. The bench itself was a massive construction, built from heavy timbers and steel brackets to provide a stable platform for engine work and fabrication projects. But one section of the top surface seemed slightly different from the rest, as if it had been replaced or modified at some point. Running my hands along the edge, I found a small lever hidden beneath the overhang, positioned exactly where someone working at the bench would naturally place their left hand. When I pressed the lever, a section of the bench top lifted like a hinged lid, revealing a hidden compartment underneath. Inside was a metal document box, fireproof and waterproof, along with several other items that made my heart race with possibility and confusion. The box contained legal documents that appeared to be related to the dealership's ownership structure, but in formats and language I didn't immediately understand. There were also personal letters addressed to me in Grandpa Sam's handwriting, sealed envelopes that suggested he had anticipated exactly the circumstances in which I would be reading them. Most intriguingly, there was a small velvet bag containing what appeared to be vintage car keys, along with photographs and documentation I couldn't immediately identify. But it was the letter marked "Read First" that commanded my immediate attention. As I opened it with trembling hands, Grandpa Sam's familiar handwriting emerged on letterhead from a law firm I didn't recognize, dated just 2 weeks before his death. "My dearest Sarah," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then Marcus has shown his true colors, and you've discovered that blood doesn't always guarantee family loyalty. I've been watching his behavior for months, seeing how he treats the business and the people who made it successful, and I've been preparing for the day when he would try to push you out entirely. The validation that my experience wasn't imaginary, that Grandpa Sam had recognized and anticipated Marcus's betrayal, brought both relief and renewed anger. But I forced myself to continue reading, desperate to understand what resources he might have provided for fighting back. What Marcus doesn't know," the letter continued, "is that Henderson Motors isn't quite the simple family business he believes it to be. The ownership structure is more complex than he realizes, and there are provisions in place that he's never bothered to investigate fully. Your grandmother Elizabeth was a much shrewder businesswoman than anyone gave her credit for, and when we established the dealership's legal framework, we included certain protections and contingencies that I've been careful to maintain over the years." This reference to my grandmother, who had died when I was very young, was completely unexpected. I had always understood that Grandpa Sam had built the business himself, with Grandma Elizabeth providing supportive but secondary assistance. The suggestion that she had been actively involved in its legal structure, that she had contributed strategic elements that remained relevant decades later, opened possibilities I had never considered. "The most important thing you need to understand," Grandpa Sam's letter continued, "is that the dealership ownership isn't structured the way Marcus assumes. Yes, I own the controlling interest, and he has a substantial stake as my son and designated successor. But there are additional ownership categories that activate under specific circumstances, provisions that were designed to protect the business's core values and original mission, even if the primary ownership changed hands." I set down the letter for a moment, trying to process the implications of what I was reading. If Grandpa Sam had built legal protections into the dealership's ownership structure, if there were provisions that Marcus didn't know about or understand, then perhaps the situation wasn't as hopeless as it had seemed just hours earlier. But the specifics remained unclear, and I needed to understand exactly what resources were available and how they could be activated. The letter resumed with more concrete guidance. In the document box, you'll find the original incorporation papers for Henderson Motors, along with subsequent amendments that Marcus has never seen. Pay particular attention to Section 12, which outlines ownership transition provisions for family members who demonstrate exceptional commitment to the business's foundational values. There's also a more recent document, a trust agreement I established last year when my health problems began, that creates additional protections for the vintage car collection and the service department operations. The mention of legal protections for the very elements Marcus was systematically dismantling sent a surge of hope through me. If Grandpa Sam had anticipated these threats and created formal mechanisms to counter them, then perhaps his legacy could be preserved despite his son's destructive priorities. But Sarah, the letter continued, the most important resource I'm leaving you isn't legal documents or contractual provisions. It's knowledge that only you possess, understanding that goes deeper than business structures or ownership percentages. You know what this dealership was meant to be, what values it was built to represent, what kind of service and craftsmanship made it successful. That knowledge, combined with the mechanical skills and customer relationships you've developed, represents the real foundation of Henderson Motors, regardless of who holds the paperwork. The affirmation of my value and contributions, coming from the man whose opinion had always mattered most to me, provided strength I hadn't felt since his death. But it also clarified the magnitude of the responsibility he was placing on my shoulders. This wasn't just about my personal vindication or professional future. It was about preserving something larger and more meaningful than individual career advancement. The keys in the velvet bag, Grandpa Sam's letter concluded. Open a storage unit I've maintained for the past 3 years, keeping certain assets and documents secure from anyone who might try to liquidate them prematurely. Unit 247 at Millbrook Self-Storage, paid through the end of next year. What you'll find there will give you both the resources and the leverage you need to ensure that Henderson Motors continues serving customers the way it was always meant to. Trust your instincts, little Sarah. Trust your knowledge. And remember that sometimes the best way to honor a legacy is to fight for it when others are trying to destroy it. I sat back against the workbench, overwhelmed by the implications of what I had just discovered. Grandpa Sam hadn't just anticipated Marcus's betrayal. He had prepared for it systematically, creating multiple layers of protection and resource that could be activated when the threat became reality. The storage unit, the legal documents, the ownership provisions I didn't yet understand. All of it suggested a strategic response to family conflict that went far beyond anything I had imagined possible. More importantly, his words clarified the true nature of what was at stake. This wasn't just about my job or my place in the family business. It was about the fundamental values that had made Henderson Motors successful, the commitment to craftsmanship and customer service that distinguished it from generic automotive retailers. Marcus's efficiency-driven approach was systematically destroying those elements, converting a specialized business into a commodity operation that could be run by anyone with basic management skills. The question now was whether I had the courage and determination to use the resources Grandpa Sam had provided, to engage in what would inevitably become a complex legal and family battle, with an uncertain outcome. Fighting Marcus would mean challenging someone with greater financial resources, better political connections, and the presumptive support of other family members who might view my efforts as inappropriate interference with legitimate business management. But the alternative, watching helplessly as everything Grandpa Sam had built was systematically dismantled for short-term profit, felt like betrayal of everything he had taught me about responsibility, craftsmanship, and the obligation to preserve meaningful work against those who saw only dollar signs. As evening shadows began lengthening across the workshop floor, I carefully returned the documents to their hidden compartment and secured the workbench. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult decisions, but tonight I needed time to process the magnitude of what I had discovered and to prepare myself for what might be the most important fight of my life. Driving home through Millbrook's quiet streets, I found myself seeing the familiar landscape with new awareness. This small Ohio city, with its mix of working-class families and modest businesses, represented the kind of community that Henderson Motors had always served. People who needed reliable transportation they could afford, who valued honest service and competent repair work, who built long-term relationships with businesses that treated them fairly and respected their needs. Marcus's vision of modernization and efficiency threatened to destroy those relationships in favor of corporate-style profit maximization that treated customers as revenue sources rather than community members. The vintage car collection, the experienced technicians, the commitment to quality service, all of it was being sacrificed for quarterly growth targets that ignored the foundation of customer loyalty and community reputation that had sustained the business for 40 years. But now I had weapons to fight back with, resources and knowledge that could potentially preserve what mattered most about Grandpa Sam's legacy. The battle ahead would test everything I had learned about automotive engineering, business relationships, and family dynamics. Most importantly, it would determine whether craftsmanship and principle could triumph over efficiency and greed in a conflict that would reshape the Henderson family forever. Sleep had been impossible. I spent the entire night pacing my small apartment, my mind racing between the devastating humiliation of being fired and the tantalizing possibilities hidden in Grandpa Sam's letter. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marcus's satisfied smirk as security escorted me out. But then I remembered the weight of those keys in the velvet bag and the promise of resources I didn't yet understand. By 5 in the morning, I gave up on rest entirely. The storage facility didn't open until 8, which gave me 3 hours to research the legal documents I'd found and try to make sense of the ownership structure Grandpa Sam had referenced. I spread everything across my kitchen table, grateful for the natural light streaming through the east-facing window as I examined papers that might hold the key to my future. The incorporation documents for Henderson Motors were far more complex than I had expected. What appeared to be a straightforward family business actually involved multiple legal entities, trust structures, and ownership categories that seemed designed by someone with sophisticated understanding of corporate law. My grandmother Elizabeth's name appeared throughout the paperwork, not as a passive spouse, but as an active architect of the business's legal framework. Section 12, which Grandpa Sam had specifically mentioned, outlined something called sweat equity ownership provisions that activated when family members demonstrated exceptional commitment to the business's foundational values through direct operational involvement. The language was dense and technical, but the basic concept seemed to be that ownership stakes could shift based on actual contribution to the business, rather than simply inheritance or initial investment. According to the documentation, any family member who worked full-time in the business for more than 5 years, demonstrated technical expertise essential to operations, and maintained customer relationships that contributed significantly to revenue generation could petition for recognition as a, quote, foundational stakeholder with enhanced ownership rights. The petition process required verification of these contributions through independent assessment and customer testimony. My hands trembled as I read this section repeatedly, trying to understand its implications. I had worked at Henderson Motors for 6 years, had developed expertise that other technicians regularly relied upon, and had built relationships with customers who specifically requested my services. If this provision was legitimate and enforceable, it might provide a path to challenging Marcus's control of the business. But the most stunning discovery came in a document dated just 3 months before Grandpa Sam's death. A trust agreement that transferred ownership of the vintage car collection and service department operations to a separate legal entity called the Henderson Automotive Heritage Foundation. According to this document, these assets could not be sold or liquidated without approval from the foundation's board, which consisted of 3 members: Grandpa Sam as founder, a local attorney named Patricia Williams as independent counsel, and me as operational representative. I stared at this document in disbelief. If it was legitimate, then Marcus's sale of the vintage cars was not just ethically wrong, but legally invalid. The Shelby Cobra, the Mercedes Gullwing, the Porsche Carrera, all of it was protected by a legal structure that required my consent before any transaction could proceed. Marcus had been operating under the assumption that he had complete control over all dealership assets, unaware that the most valuable and historically significant components had been placed beyond his reach. The implications were staggering. Not only did I potentially have legal standing to challenge the vintage car sales, but I might actually have a controlling voice in decisions about the service department, that Marcus was systematically undermining. The foundation document specifically referenced preserving, quote, traditional automotive craftsmanship and maintaining customer service standards consistent with the founder's original vision. But possessing these documents was only the beginning. I needed to understand whether they were properly executed, legally binding, and enforceable in court. More importantly, I needed to determine what resources were available in the storage unit and how they might support a legal challenge that would inevitably be expensive and contentious. At exactly 8 o'clock, I was waiting outside Millbrook self-storage, my heart pounding with anticipation and anxiety. The facility was a sprawling complex of identical metal buildings divided into numbered units, the kind of place where people stored overflow furniture, seasonal decorations, and forgotten possessions. Unit 247 was located in the back section, away from the main traffic flow, a deliberate choice that suggested Grandpa Sam had wanted privacy for whatever he was keeping here. The first key opened the padlock, securing the roll-up door. As the metal panel slid upward, morning sunlight revealed a space that looked more like a professional office than a storage unit. Filing cabinets lined the walls, organized by year and subject matter, with the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized Grandpa Sam's workshop. A small desk and chair provided workspace, while a climate control unit ensured that documents and equipment remained in perfect condition. But it was the items along the far wall that made me gasp in recognition and disbelief. 3 vehicles sat under protective covers, classic cars that I had assumed were part of the collection Marcus was liquidating. As I pulled away the covers, each revelation felt like a gift from beyond the grave. The first was a 1969 Dodge Charger R/T, numbers matching with the original 440 Magnum engine that Grandpa Sam had rebuilt to Concours specifications. The second was a 1965 Ford Mustang Fastback, the first car he had ever restored, and the one that had inspired his passion for automotive preservation. The third was a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air convertible, pristine in its two-tone paint scheme, and representing the pinnacle of American automotive design from that era. Each car came with complete documentation: restoration records, authenticity certificates, current market valuations that totaled well over $500,000. But more importantly, each represented a piece of automotive history that Marcus had assumed was his to sell. These weren't just valuable assets. They were the crown jewels of Grandpa Sam's collection, preserved in secret to ensure they would never be converted to cash by someone who couldn't appreciate their true significance. A note attached to the Mustang's steering wheel explained the strategy behind this hidden collection. "Sarah, these 3 cars represent the foundation of everything I built at Henderson Motors. The Charger represents power and performance, the values that drew customers to our service department. The Mustang represents restoration and renewal, the belief that anything can be brought back to life with enough skill and dedication. The Bel Air represents elegance and craftsmanship, the attention to detail that distinguished our work from mere commodity repair service. Together, they tell the story of American automotive excellence and the passion required to preserve it. They are yours now, along with the responsibility to ensure that story continues." But the cars were only part of what Grandpa Sam had preserved in this secret facility. The filing cabinets contained decades of business records that told a very different story about Henderson Motors than the narrative Marcus had been promoting. Customer satisfaction surveys showing consistently exceptional ratings for service department work, financial records proving that the vintage car collection had generated substantial revenue through special events, private showings, and enthusiast customer acquisition. Documentation of community involvement and charitable activities that had established the dealership's reputation as a valued community partner rather than merely a commercial enterprise. Most significantly, I found correspondence between Grandpa Sam and Patricia Williams, the attorney mentioned in the foundation documents. Their exchanges revealed a carefully planned strategy for protecting the business's core values against exactly the kind of corporate-focused management that Marcus represented. Patricia had helped structure the legal protections, advised on the timing of the trust establishment, and apparently remained prepared to assist with implementation when the need arose. A sealed envelope marked for Patricia Williams, "Open when Sarah is ready," suggested that Grandpa Sam had briefed his legal counsel on the resources and strategy I would need. The envelope's presence meant I wasn't facing this challenge alone. I had access to professional legal assistants that understood both the documents and the broader strategy they represented. But perhaps the most valuable discovery was a comprehensive customer database that Grandpa Sam had maintained separately from the dealership's official records. This database didn't just track service history and purchase patterns. It included detailed notes about customer preferences, family circumstances, and the personal relationships that had made Henderson Motors more than just a place to buy and service vehicles. These relationships represented the true foundation of the business's success. Customers who had been coming to Henderson Motors for decades, who trusted our recommendations and relied on our expertise, who valued the personal attention and genuine care that distinguished our service from corporate chain operations. Many of these customers had specifically requested my work, recognizing my diagnostic skills and appreciating my willingness to explain problems clearly without overselling unnecessary services. Reading through these customer profiles, I began to understand the full scope of what Marcus was destroying with his efficiency-focused approach. These weren't just transactions to be maximized. They were relationships built over years through consistent quality and personal attention. The new management style, rushed service, inexperienced technicians, pressure to sell additional services, was systematically undermining the trust that had taken decades to establish. But this database also represented a powerful resource for challenging Marcus's control. If I could demonstrate that the customer relationships were personally tied to my work and expertise, if I could show that the service department's profitability depended on maintaining the traditional approach to customer care, then I might have grounds for claiming operational authority through the sweat equity provisions in the original incorporation documents. I spent the entire morning in the storage unit cataloging resources and beginning to understand the magnitude of what Grandpa Sam had prepared. By noon, I had filled 2 notebooks with information and developed a preliminary strategy for moving forward. The first step was contacting Patricia Williams to understand the legal framework and determine what actions could be taken immediately to protect the assets Marcus was threatening. Patricia Williams's law office occupied a restored Victorian house in downtown Millbrook, the kind of setting that suggested traditional legal practice focused on personal relationships rather than corporate efficiency. When I called and mentioned Grandpa Sam's name, I was given an immediate appointment, further confirmation that she had been expecting my contact and was prepared to assist with whatever challenge lay ahead. Patricia herself was a woman in her early 60s, silver-haired and professionally dressed, but with a warmth that suggested genuine care for her clients, rather than mere business relationships. Her office walls displayed law degrees from Ohio State, community service awards, and photographs with local officials, evidence of someone deeply embedded in Millbrook's legal and civic community. "Sarah," she said, rising to greet me with obvious recognition despite our never having met. "Sam spoke of you often, and always with tremendous pride. He was certain you would eventually need the resources we prepared, though I know he hoped it wouldn't be necessary so soon after his passing." The confirmation that Grandpa Sam had discussed me with his attorney, that he had anticipated this conflict and prepared legal support, provided both validation and renewed determination. But I needed to understand exactly what options were available and what risks I would be taking by challenging Marcus's authority. "I've read the documents from the workshop," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "The foundation trust, the sweat equity provisions, the customer database. But I need to understand whether these protections are actually enforceable and what it would take to activate them." Patricia opened a thick file marked with my name, revealing that our meeting had been planned and prepared for months in advance. "Sam was very thorough in his planning," she said with obvious admiration. "Every document has been properly executed, filed with appropriate authorities, and structured to withstand legal challenge. The Henderson Automotive Heritage Foundation is a legitimate entity with actual legal authority over the specified assets. Your uncle's attempts to sell the vintage collection are not just ethically questionable, they're legally invalid without foundation approval." The confirmation that Marcus's actions were actually illegal, not just contrary to family wishes, sent a surge of satisfaction through me. But I needed to understand the practical implications of asserting these rights. What would happen if I challenged the sales? Could I actually stop them? "Not only could you stop them," Patricia replied with growing enthusiasm, "you could demand return of any vehicles already sold without proper authorization." The foundation documents include specific provisions for recovering assets disposed of improperly. Your uncle could face significant financial liability if he's already completed transactions without required approvals. The possibility that I could not only prevent future sales but potentially recover cars already sold was beyond my most optimistic expectations. But I also recognized that asserting these rights would inevitably trigger intense family conflict and legal warfare that could drag on for months or years. What about the sweat equity provisions? I asked, moving to what might be the even more significant challenge to Marcus's control. Could I actually claim ownership stake in the dealership based on my work there? Patricia's expression grew more serious as she reviewed another section of the file. That's more complex but potentially even more powerful, she acknowledged. The provisions are legitimate and were structured specifically to recognize family members who contribute to the business through operational expertise rather than just financial investment. Your 6 years of full-time work, your technical skills, and your customer relationships all support a strong claim for enhanced ownership status. She pulled out a document I hadn't seen before, an assessment form that required verification of my contributions to the business through multiple sources. To activate the sweat equity provisions, we need to document your actual impact on dealership operations. Customer testimonials, revenue attribution, evidence of your technical expertise being essential to service department success. It's a comprehensive process, but one that Sam was confident you could satisfy. The realization that Grandpa Sam had not only anticipated this conflict, but had structured formal legal mechanisms to support my position was both empowering and overwhelming. But the practical challenges of documenting my contributions and building a legal case remained daunting, especially against an opponent with greater financial resources and established business relationships. How long would this process take? I asked, trying to understand the timeline and commitment required. And what kind of costs are we talking about? The foundation actions could be implemented immediately, Patricia replied. We can file for temporary restraining orders to prevent further asset disposal within days. The sweat equity petition would take longer, probably 3 to 6 months for full resolution depending on whether your uncle contests it. As for costs, Sam established a legal fund specifically for this purpose. You won't need to worry about attorney fees or court expenses. The revelation that Grandpa Sam had even anticipated the financial burden of legal action and had prepared resources to address it was the final confirmation I needed. This wasn't a desperate gamble with uncertain prospects. It was a carefully planned strategy implemented by someone who understood both business and family dynamics far better than I had realized. But beyond the legal mechanics, I needed to understand the broader implications of moving forward. If I do this, if I challenge Marcus's control of the business, what happens to family relationships? What happens to the dealership during the legal proceedings? Patricia's expression grew thoughtful as she considered the human dimensions alongside the legal technicalities. Family conflict is inevitable, Sarah. Your uncle has made choices that prioritize short-term profit over long-term sustainability. And challenging those choices will be seen as betrayal, regardless of your legal standing. But the alternative is watching everything Sam built being systematically destroyed. She leaned forward, her tone becoming more personal. I've known your family for 20 years, and I've watched this conflict developing since Sam's health began declining. Your uncle isn't a bad man, but he fundamentally misunderstands what made Henderson Motors successful. His MBA training has convinced him that efficiency and profit maximization are the only metrics that matter. But he's ignored the customer relationships and community reputation that generate the revenue he wants to maximize. The assessment aligned perfectly with my own observations of Marcus's management approach. His focus on quarterly growth targets and cost reduction had systematically undermined the elements that distinguished Henderson Motors from generic automotive retailers. The experienced technicians, the vintage car collection, the commitment to quality service, all of it was being sacrificed for metrics that looked good on financial statements but ignored the foundation of customer loyalty that sustained the business. The legal proceedings would actually protect the dealership during the transition, Patricia continued. Court supervision would prevent further asset disposal or operational changes that might damage the business permanently. It would create a stable environment for demonstrating that the traditional approach is more profitable long-term than your uncle's efficiency-focused strategy. The possibility of using legal action not just to reclaim my position, but to actually protect the business from further damage was an outcome I hadn't considered. If Patricia was right, challenging Marcus's authority might be the only way to preserve what remained of Grandpa Sam's legacy, before it was completely dismantled. "There's one more thing you should know," Patricia said, reaching for another document from the file. "Sam wasn't the only one concerned about your uncle's direction for the business. Several major customers have already contacted me about their dissatisfaction with recent service quality and their intention to find alternative providers if the deterioration continues." She handed me a folder containing letters from customers I recognized, loyal clients who had been coming to Henderson Motors for decades and who valued the personal attention and technical expertise that had always distinguished our service. Reading their concerns about rushed appointments, inexperienced technicians, and pressure to purchase unnecessary services confirmed that Marcus's efficiency approach was already damaging the customer relationships that were essential to long-term success. "These customers represent nearly 30% of service department revenue," Patricia noted. "If they leave because of quality concerns, your uncle's profit maximization strategy will actually reduce profitability significantly. That gives us additional leverage for demonstrating that your operational approach is essential to business success. The combination of legal authority, financial resources, customer support, and documented business impact created a foundation for challenge that was far stronger than I had dared hope. But the decision to move forward remained mine, and the consequences would reshape not just my own future, but the entire Henderson family dynamic. "I need some time to think about this," I said finally, though my heart was already telling me what my head was still processing. "The resources are incredible, and I'm grateful beyond words that Grandpa Sam prepared all of this. But I want to be completely certain before I start something that can't be undone." Patricia nodded understanding. "Of course. This is a major decision with long-term implications. But don't take too long. Every day your uncle continues operating without oversight, more damage is done to the business and more assets may be put at risk. The Shelby sale is scheduled for next week, and once that transaction is completed, recovery becomes much more complicated." The urgency of the timeline crystallized my thinking. While I wrestled with family loyalty and personal doubts, Marcus was systematically destroying everything Grandpa Sam had built. The vintage cars, the experienced technicians, the customer relationships, all of it was being sacrificed for quarterly profit targets that ignored the foundation of sustainable business success. As I drove back to my apartment, my mind was churning with possibilities and concerns. The legal resources were undeniably powerful, the financial support was adequate, and the business case for traditional operations was compelling. But family conflict was inevitable, and the emotional cost of challenging Marcus's authority would be significant, regardless of the legal outcome. More importantly, success would bring responsibilities I wasn't certain I was prepared to handle. If the sweat equity provisions were activated, if I gained actual ownership authority in Henderson Motors, then I would be responsible for proving that the traditional approach could generate sustainable profitability while preserving the values and relationships that made the business meaningful. That evening, I returned to Grandpa Sam's workshop, seeking clarity in the space where he had taught me everything I knew about automotive mechanics and business relationships. Sitting at the workbench where we had solved countless technical challenges together, I tried to imagine what he would advise in this situation. The answer seemed obvious. Grandpa Sam had never walked away from difficult problems, had never accepted that complex challenges couldn't be solved with enough knowledge, patience, and determination. He had built Henderson Motors from nothing into a respected community institution by focusing on quality, honesty, and customer service, rather than taking shortcuts or prioritizing immediate profit over long-term sustainability. More importantly, he had trusted me with the resources and knowledge to continue that work. The legal documents, the hidden assets, the customer relationships, the technical expertise, all of it represented his confidence that I could preserve and advance what he had started. Walking away would be betraying not just his legacy, but the customers and community members who depended on Henderson Motors for honest automotive service. By midnight, my decision was made. I would contact Patricia Williams in the morning and begin the process of asserting my legal rights to protect the vintage collection and challenge Marcus's operational authority. The family conflict would be painful, and the legal proceedings would be complex. But the alternative was watching everything meaningful about Henderson Motors being destroyed by someone who valued only financial metrics. The storage unit visit had revealed resources beyond my most optimistic expectations. The workshop search had provided legal weapons I never knew existed. The attorney consultation had confirmed that these tools were actually enforceable and supported by adequate funding. All the pieces were in place for a challenge that could not only restore my position but actually improve the business by returning it to the principles that had made it successful originally. But the most important discovery wasn't in documents or legal strategies. It was the realization that I wasn't fighting just for my own career advancement or family recognition. I was fighting for a vision of business that prioritized craftsmanship, customer relationships, and community service over efficiency and profit maximization. The customers who trusted Henderson Motors, the technicians who took pride in quality work, the community members who relied on honest automotive service, all of them deserved better than what Marcus's corporate approach was delivering. Grandpa Sam had prepared me for this battle in ways I was only beginning to understand. The mechanical skills he had taught me provided technical credibility that Marcus and his sons could never match. The customer relationships I had built demonstrated practical business value that transcended academic training. The legal resources he had assembled gave me tools for challenging established authority through legitimate channels rather than mere protest or complaint. Tomorrow would begin a process that would test everything I had learned about automotive service, business relationships, and family dynamics. But tonight, for the first time since Marcus had fired me, I felt genuine optimism about the future. The Henderson Motors legacy wasn't lost. It was simply waiting for someone with the knowledge, determination, and resources to reclaim it from those who had temporarily gained control but never understood its true value. The vintage cars in the storage unit, the customer letters expressing dissatisfaction with current service, the legal documents establishing my rights to challenge operational decisions, all of it pointed toward the same conclusion. The traditional approach to automotive service, the one that had built Henderson Motors into a respected community institution, wasn't just ethically superior to Marcus's efficiency-focused strategy. It was also more profitable long-term, more sustainable, and more aligned with customer expectations and community needs. Fighting for that approach wouldn't just restore my position in the family business. It would actually improve the business by returning it to the principles that had made it successful in the first place. The challenge ahead would be proving that craftsmanship and customer relationships could triumph over corporate efficiency and profit maximization in a battle that would reshape the Henderson family forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as I walked toward what would either be my vindication or my complete destruction. Patricia Williams had filed the emergency motion to halt the vintage car sales at dawn, and by 10 o'clock we would face Marcus and his legal team in front of Judge Richardson. The weight of the legal documents in my briefcase felt both empowering and terrifying as I prepared to challenge the man who had controlled my family's destiny for the past 8 months. I had spent the previous evening calling customers from Grandpa Sam's private database, and their responses had been overwhelmingly supportive. Mrs. Chen, whose BMW I had diagnosed with a complex electrical issue that 2 other shops had missed, offered to testify about the declining service quality since Marcus's efficiency changes. Tom Rodriguez, a collector who had trusted me with his vintage Porsche maintenance for 3 years, expressed outrage when I explained that Marcus was selling off the collection that had originally attracted him to Henderson Motors. Even Dr. Sarah Patterson, who had been bringing her family's vehicles to the dealership for 15 years, confirmed her plan to find a new service provider if the current management continued prioritizing speed over accuracy. Their support provided emotional strength, but it was the legal revelation Patricia had shared yesterday that gave me true confidence. The Henderson Automotive Heritage Foundation wasn't just a protective trust for the vintage cars. It was a legally binding entity with real authority that Marcus had completely ignored. Every sale he had completed or planned required my signature as operational representative, and proceeding without proper authorization made him liable for significant damages and potential criminal charges. Walking into the courthouse, I spotted Marcus immediately. He stood near the information desk surrounded by 3 men in expensive suits, their confident postures and animated discussion suggesting they viewed this legal challenge as a minor inconvenience to be quickly dismissed. Derek and Brandon flanked their father, both looking uncomfortable in their formal attire, but attempting to project the same air of entitled authority that had always characterized their approach to family business. Marcus's expression when he saw me enter was a masterpiece of controlled fury. His eyes narrowed as he took in my professional appearance. Navy suit, leather briefcase, confident stride, elements that contradicted his fundamental assumption that I was simply a disgruntled employee acting out of spite, rather than someone with legitimate legal standing and substantial resources. "Gentlemen," he said loudly enough for me to hear, "it appears our family's wayward mechanic has found herself a lawyer. This should be amusing." The dismissive comment was clearly intended to undermine my credibility with anyone within earshot, portraying me as a troublemaker pursuing frivolous litigation against legitimate business authority. But Patricia Williams chose that moment to arrive, her presence immediately commanding attention and respect from courthouse staff who recognized her reputation for thorough preparation and successful outcomes. "Sarah," she said warmly, positioning herself between me and Marcus's group, "are you ready to educate some people about proper corporate governance and fiduciary responsibility?" Her confident tone and professional demeanor created an immediate shift in the courthouse atmosphere. This wasn't a desperate employee pursuing vindictive litigation. This was serious legal action being pursued by one of the region's most respected attorneys. Marcus's lawyers exchanged glances that suggested they were reevaluating their initial assessment of the situation. Judge Richardson's courtroom was a testament to traditional legal formality, with dark wood paneling and high ceilings that conveyed the gravity of judicial proceedings. As we took our positions at the plaintiff's table, I felt the weight of generations of Henderson family history pressing down on me. Everything Grandpa Sam had built, everything the dealership had meant to our community, would be decided by legal arguments and documentary evidence in the next few hours. Patricia arranged her materials with practiced efficiency while I reviewed the customer testimonials we had gathered. The contrast between our organized preparation and the hurried whispers among Marcus's legal team suggested we had caught them off guard with both the timing and the substance of our legal challenge. Judge Richardson entered with the measured pace of someone accustomed to resolving complex disputes, his silver hair and lined face suggesting decades of experience with family conflicts that had spilled into legal proceedings. His reputation for fairness and thorough analysis of evidence provided hope that our case would receive serious consideration rather than being dismissed as family squabbling. "This is an emergency motion to halt asset disposal pending resolution of ownership disputes," he began, reviewing the documents Patricia had filed. "Ms. Williams, please explain the nature of your client's claims and the urgency of the requested relief." Patricia rose with the confidence of someone who had argued hundreds of cases in this very courtroom. "Your Honor, my client Sarah Henderson seeks immediate injunctive relief to prevent the unauthorized sale of assets that are legally protected under the Henderson Automotive Heritage Foundation, a trust entity established by her grandfather Samuel Henderson, specifically to preserve historically significant vehicles and maintain traditional automotive service standards." She opened her briefcase and retrieved the foundation documents, approaching the bench with the calm assurance of someone presenting ironclad evidence. "The defendant Marcus Henderson has been selling vintage automobiles that are explicitly protected under this trust, proceeding without the required authorization from my client as operational representative. We have documentation showing that he has already completed one unauthorized sale and has another scheduled for tomorrow." Marcus's lead attorney, a sharp-featured man whose expensive suit couldn't disguise his obvious surprise at the foundation's existence, rose to object. "Your Honor, this alleged trust document has never been presented to my client or disclosed in any business proceedings. We question both its authenticity and its relevance to normal business operations at Henderson Motors." Judge Richardson accepted the foundation documents from Patricia and began reviewing them with the careful attention to detail that had made him one of Ohio's most respected trial judges. The courtroom fell silent except for the soft rustling of paper and the distant sounds of courthouse activity as he examined the legal framework that Grandpa Sam had constructed to protect his legacy. "These documents appear to be properly executed and notarized," he observed after several minutes of careful review. "Mr. Harrison, has your client been operating under the assumption that he has unrestricted authority over all dealership assets?" Marcus's attorney consulted hurriedly with his client before responding. "Your Honor, My client inherited operational control of Henderson Motors upon his father's death and has been managing all business assets in accordance with standard industry practices. This alleged trust arrangement was never disclosed during estate proceedings or business transition planning. Patricia had anticipated this response and was prepared with documentation that would prove devastating to Marcus's position. Your Honor, the foundation was established 3 years ago and properly filed with the Ohio Secretary of State. Mr. Marcus Henderson's failure to discover this filing suggests inadequate due diligence in his management of business assets rather than any deficiency in the trust's legal standing. She produced the filing receipts and state acknowledgments that confirmed the foundation's legitimate status, along with correspondence showing that copies of all documents had been sent to Marcus's business address. Whether he had actually received and read these materials was irrelevant. The legal obligations they created were binding regardless of his awareness or understanding. Judge Richardson studied the additional documentation with growing interest. Ms. Williams, what specific relief is your client seeking and what evidence supports the claim of urgent need for judicial intervention? We seek immediate injunctive relief preventing any further sale or disposal of assets protected under the Foundation Trust, Patricia replied. We also request return of the 1967 Shelby Cobra that was sold last week without proper authorization, along with damages for breach of fiduciary duty. The mention of the Shelby sale sent visible shock through Marcus's legal team. They had clearly been unaware that specific assets had already been illegally disposed of, and the potential liability for recovering a sold vehicle at current market values was substantial. Marcus himself looked pale as he realized the magnitude of his legal exposure. Furthermore, Patricia continued, we have evidence that Mr. Marcus Henderson's unauthorized management decisions are damaging customer relationships and reducing business profitability in ways that violate his fiduciary obligations to other stakeholders. She handed the judge a folder containing the customer testimonials we had collected, along with financial analysis showing declining service department revenue under Marcus's efficiency-focused management. The combination of legal violations and business mismanagement created a compelling case for immediate judicial intervention. Judge Richardson reviewed the customer complaints with obvious interest, occasionally glancing at Marcus with expressions that suggested growing concern about the defendant's business judgment. When he reached Tom Rodriguez's letter about leaving Henderson Motors specifically because of the vintage collection's dissolution, his eyebrows rose in a way that indicated recognition of the business implications. Mr. Harrison, the judge addressed Marcus's attorney, does your client dispute that these vehicles are covered by the trust arrangement, or does he claim authority to override the trust provisions? The question placed Marcus's legal team in an impossible position. Disputing the trust's coverage would require proving that the foundation documents were fraudulent or improperly executed, while claiming override authority would mean acknowledging the trust's validity, while arguing for the right to violate its provisions. Either approach faced significant legal obstacles and potential criminal implications. Marcus's attorney requested a brief recess to consult with his client, a delay that suggested they were scrambling to develop strategy for a situation they had not anticipated or prepared for. During the break, Patricia reviewed our position with quiet satisfaction. They're trapped, she observed, with professional appreciation. Either they acknowledge the trust's authority and admit to violating it, or they challenge its legitimacy and face fraud charges if they're wrong. Marcus should have hired better lawyers or bothered to read his business documents more carefully. When proceedings resumed, Marcus's attorney had adopted a conciliatory tone that suggested recognition of their weakened position. Your Honor, while we continue to question the scope and applicability of these trust provisions, my client is willing to suspend any planned asset sales pending resolution of the ownership dispute. It was a partial victory, but Judge Richardson wasn't satisfied with half measures. Mr. Harrison, that addresses future sales but doesn't resolve the unauthorized transaction that has already occurred. What is your client's position regarding the Shelby Cobra that was apparently sold in violation of trust provisions? The question highlighted the most damaging aspect of Marcus's situation. Recovering a sold vehicle would require admitting wrongdoing, paying significant legal costs, and potentially facing criminal charges for theft of trust assets. But refusing to pursue recovery would constitute additional breach of fiduciary duty and ongoing violation of court authority. Marcus himself leaned forward to whisper urgently with his attorney, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment as he realized the magnitude of his legal exposure. The confident businessman who had fired me with such satisfaction just days earlier was now facing potential criminal prosecution and massive financial liability. "Your Honor," Marcus's attorney said finally, "my client will work with opposing counsel to facilitate return of the vehicle in question, pending resolution of the broader ownership dispute." Judge Richardson nodded approval but wasn't finished with his judicial inquiry. "Ms. Williams, your motion also references broader management issues and fiduciary violations. Are you seeking expanded judicial oversight of business operations?" Patricia had been preparing for this moment throughout our strategy sessions. "Your Honor, we believe the evidence shows systematic mismanagement that threatens the business's long-term viability and violates obligations to customers, employees, and other stakeholders. We request appointment of an independent business manager to oversee operations pending resolution of the ownership dispute." The request for independent management was ambitious, but supported by substantial evidence of Marcus's poor business decisions. The customer complaints, declining revenue, employee turnover, and trust violations created a compelling case for judicial intervention to protect the business from further damage. Marcus's attorney objected vehemently. "Your Honor, appointing outside management would be devastating to ongoing business operations and represents an extreme remedy that isn't justified by the evidence presented." But Judge Richardson had been studying the customer testimonials and financial documentation with obvious concern. "Mr. Harrison, these materials suggest that your client's management decisions are driving away longtime customers and reducing profitability. How do you respond to claims that his efficiency-focused approach is actually harming the business?" The question struck at the heart of Marcus's fundamental misunderstanding of what made Henderson Motors successful. His MBA training had convinced him that cost reduction and process standardization would automatically improve profitability, but he had ignored the customer relationships and service quality that generated the revenue he was trying to maximize. "Your Honor," Marcus's attorney replied weakly, "modern business management requires difficult decisions to improve efficiency and competitiveness. Some customer dissatisfaction is inevitable during transition periods." Judge Richardson's expression suggested he found this explanation inadequate. "According to these testimonials, customers are leaving specifically because service quality has declined under current management." That doesn't sound like temporary transition difficulties. It sounds like systematic problems with business strategy. Patricia seized the opportunity to present our strongest evidence for management oversight. "Your Honor, we have documentation showing that the defendant's efficiency measures have reduced service department revenue by 18% in just 8 months. His approach isn't improving profitability. It's destroying the customer relationships that sustain long-term business success." The financial analysis was devastating to Marcus's position because it proved that his management strategy was actually counterproductive by his own metrics. He couldn't claim to prioritize profitability while implementing policies that demonstrably reduced revenue and drove away customers. Judge Richardson studied the financial documentation carefully before addressing both legal teams. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm granting the plaintiff's motion for injunctive relief preventing further asset sales. I'm also ordering immediate return of the Shelby Cobra and requiring both parties to work with court-appointed mediator to develop acceptable business management protocols pending resolution of the ownership dispute." The ruling was a complete victory that exceeded our most optimistic expectations. Not only had we prevented further destruction of the vintage collection, but we had gained judicial oversight of business operations that would prevent Marcus from continuing his destructive efficiency campaign. Marcus's face had gone completely pale as he realized the implications of the judge's ruling. His authority over Henderson Motors had been effectively suspended, and he now faced potential criminal prosecution for theft of trust assets. The confident businessman who had dismissed me as a mere mechanic was now subject to court supervision and legal liability that could destroy his financial future. As we left the courthouse, Patricia was practically glowing with professional satisfaction. "That was even better than I hoped," she said as we walked toward her car. "Not only did we stop the asset sales, but we've established judicial oversight that will prevent further damage to the business while we pursue the ownership challenge." The legal victory felt surreal after the humiliation of being fired just days earlier. But the real test would come in proving that the traditional approach to automotive service could generate better results than Marcus's efficiency-focused strategy. Judicial oversight provided protection from further destructive policies, but demonstrating superior business outcomes would require returning to the customer-focused principles that had originally made Henderson Motors successful. "What happens next?" I asked, as we reviewed the implications of the court's ruling. "We implement the sweat equity petition while working with the court-appointed mediator to establish interim management protocols," Patricia explained. "The judge's ruling today provides strong precedent for recognizing your operational authority, and the customer testimonials prove that your approach generates better business results than your uncle's methods." The prospect of actually managing Henderson Motors, of implementing the customer service and quality standards that Grandpa Sam had always prioritized, was both exciting and terrifying. I had the mechanical expertise and customer relationships to succeed, but running a business required skills and knowledge that extended far beyond automotive repair. But Patricia had anticipated this concern as well. "Remember, you won't be operating alone. The court oversight provides protection from interference, and I can help with legal and administrative issues. More importantly, you have the customer relationships and employee support that are essential to business success." As we drove back toward downtown Millbrook, I found myself looking at the familiar landscape with new awareness. The small businesses and working-class neighborhoods that comprised our community represented the customer base that Henderson Motors had always served. People who needed reliable transportation they could afford, who valued honest service and competent repair work, who built long-term relationships with businesses that treated them fairly and respected their needs. Marcus's corporate approach had systematically alienated these customers in favor of efficiency metrics that ignored the human relationships underlying successful business operations. But the court's ruling provided an opportunity to restore the traditional principles that had made Henderson Motors a respected community institution for over 40 years. The real challenge would be proving that customer service and quality workmanship could generate sustainable profitability in an industry increasingly dominated by corporate chains and efficiency-focused management. But I had advantages that Marcus had never understood: technical expertise that customers trusted, relationships built through years of reliable service, and commitment to the values that had originally made the business successful. That afternoon, I returned to Henderson Motors for the first time since my firing, accompanied by Patricia and the court-appointed mediator. The experience of walking through the showroom as a legal authority rather than dismissed employee was emotionally overwhelming, but I forced myself to focus on the practical tasks ahead. The service department was in worse condition than I had realized. 2 experienced technicians had quit since my firing, leaving only junior staff who lacked the diagnostic skills necessary for complex repairs. Customer complaints had increased dramatically, and several long-time clients had already transferred their business to competitors. The efficiency measures that Marcus had implemented were systematically destroying the department's reputation and profitability. But the remaining staff members greeted my return with obvious relief and enthusiasm. Jerry Martinez, the senior technician who had trained me during my first year, openly expressed his satisfaction with the court's ruling. "We need you back, Sarah," he said simply. "This place hasn't been the same since Marcus started his efficiency program. Customers are angry, the work is rushed, and nobody takes pride in what they're doing anymore." The customer service area provided even more evidence of Marcus's destructive impact. The comfortable lounge where people had once relaxed while their vehicles received careful attention had been converted into a high-pressure sales environment, where service advisors pushed unnecessary repairs and expensive upgrades. The personal relationships that had distinguished Henderson Motors from chain operations had been replaced by transaction-focused interactions that treated customers as revenue opportunities rather than community members. Working with the court-appointed mediator, we developed interim management protocols that would restore traditional service standards while maintaining judicial oversight of operations. I would have authority over service department operations, customer relations, and quality control, while Marcus retained limited responsibility for financial administration under court supervision. The arrangement wasn't ideal from either perspective, but it provided protection from further destructive policies while establishing my operational authority. More importantly, it created an opportunity to demonstrate that customer-focused service could generate better financial results than efficiency-driven management. The first customer interaction under the new arrangement came that very afternoon. Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman whose Honda had been poorly serviced during my absence, brought the vehicle back with the same problem that had supposedly been repaired 2 weeks earlier. Under Marcus's efficiency system, she had been charged for work that wasn't actually completed, and parts that weren't necessary. I spent 2 hours diagnosing the real problem, a simple electrical connection that had been overlooked by inexperienced technicians rushing to meet productivity targets. The repair took 15 minutes and cost $12 in parts, but Mrs. Thompson's relief and gratitude were worth far more than the modest charge. "This is why I've been coming here for 10 years, she said as I explained what had actually been wrong with her car. "You take time to find the real problem instead of just throwing parts at it and hoping something works." Her comment crystallized the fundamental difference between traditional automotive service and Marcus's efficiency-focused approach. Proper diagnosis required time, experience, and genuine commitment to solving problems correctly, rather than maximizing transaction volume. Customers recognized and valued this difference, and their loyalty to businesses that provided honest service created long-term profitability that exceeded short-term efficiency gains. By the end of the day, word had spread through Millbrook's automotive community that Henderson Motors was returning to its traditional service standards. 3 customers who had left during Marcus's tenure called to schedule appointments, and 2 new clients contacted us specifically because of recommendations from satisfied customers. The immediate response confirmed what Grandpa Sam had always understood. Reputation and customer relationships were the foundation of sustainable business success. Technical expertise, honest service, and genuine care for customer needs created loyalty that no amount of advertising or price manipulation could achieve. That evening, I returned to the storage unit to retrieve the Mustang that Grandpa Sam had preserved for exactly this moment. Driving his first restoration project through downtown Millbrook felt like a symbolic reclamation of the values and principles that had built Henderson Motors into a respected community institution. The car ran perfectly, its rebuilt engine purring with the precision that only came from careful craftsmanship and attention to detail. Every component had been restored to original specifications, every system tuned to optimal performance, every surface maintained in pristine condition. It represented everything that distinguished quality workmanship from mass production efficiency, the time, skill, and dedication required to preserve mechanical excellence. As I parked the Mustang in the dealership lot, several passers-by stopped to admire its classic lines and flawless restoration. A vintage car display had always drawn people to Henderson Motors, creating interest and excitement that translated into customer relationships and business opportunities. Marcus's decision to liquidate the collection had eliminated this powerful marketing tool in favor of short-term cash that would quickly be spent on corporate overhead. But the real victory wasn't in recovering specific assets or establishing legal authority. It was in proving that traditional automotive service principles could generate better business results than efficiency-focused management. The customer response to restored service standards, the employee enthusiasm for quality workmanship, and the community support for businesses that prioritized relationships over transactions, all confirmed that Grandpa Sam's approach was not just ethically superior but more profitable long-term. The legal battle was far from over, and the family conflict would undoubtedly intensify as Marcus realized the magnitude of his defeat. But for the first time since his heart attack, I felt genuine optimism about Henderson Motors' future. The resources were in place, the legal protections were established, and the customer support was overwhelming. Most importantly, I had discovered that I possess not just the technical skills to succeed in automotive service, but the leadership abilities to preserve and advance the values that had made Henderson Motors special. The court's recognition of my operational authority, the customer enthusiasm for restored service standards, and the employee support for traditional craftsmanship all confirmed that Grandpa Sam's confidence in my abilities had been justified. The journey from dismissed mechanic to court-recognized business authority had taken less than a week, but it felt like a lifetime of transformation. Everything I had learned about automotive service, customer relationships, and family dynamics was being tested in a conflict that would determine not just my personal future, but the direction of a business that had served our community for over 40 years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as we implemented the court's management protocols and continued pursuing the ownership dispute. But tonight, surrounded by the vintage cars that represented our heritage and the tools that embodied our craftsmanship, I felt ready for whatever battles lay ahead. The Henderson Motors legacy wasn't just preserved, it was positioned to thrive under leadership that understood its true value. The ringing phone woke me at 5:30 in the morning, 3 weeks after the court ruling that had transformed my life from unemployed mechanic to recognized business authority. Patricia's voice carried an urgency that immediately cleared my head of sleep. "Sarah, we have a problem. Marcus filed a counter-petition last night claiming the foundation documents are fraudulent. He's also hired a private investigator who's been digging into your grandfather's final months, looking for evidence of diminished capacity or undue influence." I sat up in bed, my heart racing as I processed the implications. While I had been focused on restoring Henderson Motors to its former excellence, Marcus had been plotting a counterattack designed to undermine everything we had accomplished. The legal victory that had seemed so complete was now under direct assault. "What kind of evidence is he claiming to have?" I asked, pulling on clothes as I spoke. "Affidavits from his sons alleging that Sam was confused and disoriented during his final visits to the dealership. Medical records suggesting his heart medication could have affected his judgment. A handwriting expert who claims inconsistencies in the foundation documents," Patricia replied grimly. "It's all circumstantial, but it's enough to force a competency hearing." The attack was more sophisticated than I had expected from Marcus, whose previous approach had relied on brute force and assumption of authority rather than careful legal strategy. But the timing made sense. He had spent weeks studying our success at the dealership, watching customer satisfaction scores improve and revenue increase under traditional service standards. The evidence was becoming overwhelming that his efficiency approach had been counterproductive. "There's more," Patricia continued. "He's also petitioned to remove you from operational authority, claiming conflict of interest since you're benefiting financially from the foundation structure. The hearing is scheduled for Monday morning." I arrived at Henderson Motors that morning to find an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty among the staff. Word of the legal challenge had spread quickly through Millbrook's tight-knit business community, and several employees were openly worried about job security if Marcus regained control. Jerry Martinez approached me as I entered the service bay, his expression reflecting concerns that went beyond personal employment. "Sarah, the team is scared," he said quietly. "We've all seen how much better things have been running these past few weeks, but if Marcus comes back with those efficiency programs, we're going to lose more good people. And frankly, some of us are worried about retaliation for supporting you during the transition." His concerns were entirely justified. Marcus had demonstrated vindictive tendencies when his authority was challenged, and employees who had embraced the return to traditional service standards would likely face consequences if he regained control. The human cost of this legal battle extended far beyond my personal situation. But the most immediate threat came from an unexpected source. Derek appeared in the service bay doorway, accompanied by 2 men in suits who carried briefcases and the unmistakable demeanor of legal investigators. They weren't here for automotive service. "Sarah," Derek announced with obvious satisfaction, "these gentlemen are here to review business operations and interview staff members about recent management changes. I trust you'll provide complete cooperation as required by the court's oversight provisions." The investigation was clearly designed to build evidence for Marcus's competency challenge, documenting any operational problems or employee complaints that could be attributed to my management decisions. But Derek had miscalculated the loyalty and satisfaction of staff members who had experienced both management approaches. Mrs. Rodriguez, our customer service coordinator who had worked at Henderson Motors for 12 years, was the first employee interviewed. I couldn't hear the conversation from my position in the service bay, but her body language suggested she was providing enthusiastic support for current operations, rather than the criticism Derek had expected. Tom Wilson, one of our senior technicians, emerged from his interview shaking his head with obvious disgust. "They wanted me to say that service quality had declined under your management," he told me privately. I set them straight about whose efficiency program was actually causing problems around here. By noon, it became clear that Derek's investigation was backfiring spectacularly. Instead of documenting operational problems under my authority, the interviews were generating testimony about improved working conditions, better customer relationships, and higher job satisfaction since the return to traditional service standards. But the real blow to Marcus's strategy came from an unexpected source. Dr. Harrison, Grandpa Sam's cardiologist, contacted Patricia directly after hearing about the competency challenge. His medical opinion would prove devastating to claims about diminished capacity. Sam Henderson was one of the most mentally acute patients I've ever treated, Dr. Harrison told Patricia during a phone conversation I was privileged to hear. His heart condition never affected his cognitive function, and the medications he was taking are specifically chosen to avoid mental side effects. Anyone claiming he was incompetent during his final months is either misinformed or deliberately lying. The medical testimony eliminated the foundation of Marcus's competency argument, but Patricia warned me not to become overconfident. Legal challenges can take unexpected turns, she reminded me. We need to focus on documenting every success we've achieved since taking operational control. The documentation was impressive. Customer satisfaction scores had increased by 32% since the restoration of traditional service standards. Revenue was up 18% month over month, driven primarily by returning customers and positive word-of-mouth referrals. Employee turnover had dropped to zero, with 2 experienced technicians actually returning to work after learning about the management changes. Most significantly, the vintage car restoration program I had implemented was generating substantial new business. Tom Rodriguez had commissioned a complete restoration of his 1969 Camaro after seeing the quality of our work on the display vehicles. Mrs. Patterson had referred 3 friends who needed classic car maintenance services that other shops couldn't provide competently. The combination of improved traditional services and specialized restoration capabilities was creating exactly the kind of customer loyalty and revenue diversification that Grandpa Sam had always envisioned. But Marcus's legal challenge threatened to destroy this progress before it could be fully established. Friday afternoon brought news that would change everything. Patricia called with information that Marcus had made a critical strategic error that would ultimately destroy his credibility and legal position. He sold the Shelby Cobra to a private collector in California for $250,000, she said, with barely contained excitement. But we've had it appraised by 3 independent experts, and the current market value is at least $475,000. He didn't just violate the trust provisions. He breached his fiduciary duty by accepting a below-market offer. The revelation that Marcus had not only stolen trust assets, but had done so incompetently, provided powerful evidence of his unfitness for business management. No competent dealer would accept such a substantial loss on a premium vehicle without compelling justification. There's more, Patricia continued. The buyer was apparently someone Marcus met at a business conference, not a legitimate collector or dealer. The transaction looks increasingly like a favor or payoff, rather than an arm's-length business deal. The implications were staggering. If Marcus had sold the Shelby as part of some personal arrangement rather than legitimate business transaction, he could face criminal prosecution for embezzlement, in addition to the civil violations we were already pursuing. But the most damaging evidence came from Marcus himself. In his eagerness to challenge my authority, he had filed legal documents detailing his management philosophy and business decisions. The contrast between his efficiency-focused approach and the improved results under traditional management provided compelling proof that his methods were fundamentally flawed. He's essentially arguing that his right to destroy the business should supersede your obligation to preserve it, Patricia observed with professional appreciation. It's not a winning legal position. Monday morning's competency hearing drew a packed courtroom, with many Henderson Motors customers and employees attending to support my position. The visual contrast between our community support and Marcus's isolated legal team was immediately apparent to Judge Richardson. Marcus's attorney led with the handwriting analysis, presenting expert testimony suggesting inconsistencies in Grandpa Sam's signature on the foundation documents. But Patricia had prepared a devastating counter-argument that exposed the fundamental weakness in this approach. Your Honor, she said during cross-examination, the alleged inconsistencies are entirely consistent with a man in his 70s who suffered from arthritis in his hands. Moreover, we have video evidence of Mr. Samuel Henderson signing these documents in the presence of witnesses who can testify to his complete mental competence. The video evidence was something Marcus's team had not anticipated. Grandpa Sam had recorded the foundation's signing ceremony specifically to prevent future challenges, and his clear, articulate explanation of the document's purpose demolished any claims about confusion or diminished capacity. But the final blow came when Patricia presented the financial analysis of Marcus's management decisions. The courtroom fell silent as she detailed the customer losses, revenue declines, and below-market asset sales that had characterized his approach to business leadership. "Your Honor," she concluded, "the evidence shows that Mr. Marcus Henderson's management philosophy has been consistently destructive to business operations, customer relationships, and asset values. His competency challenge is really an attempt to regain authority to continue these harmful practices." Judge Richardson's ruling was swift and comprehensive. Not only did he reject the competency challenge, but he expanded my operational authority to include full management control pending resolution of the ownership dispute. Marcus's legal gambit had backfired completely, strengthening my position rather than undermining it. As we left the courthouse, I realized that the real victory wasn't legal but operational. The 3 weeks of proving that traditional automotive service could generate superior results had established credibility that transcended any courtroom ruling. Customers, employees, and community members had experienced the difference between efficiency-focused management and customer-centered service. That evening, I stood in Grandpa Sam's workshop surrounded by the tools and memories that had shaped my understanding of quality craftsmanship. The legal battles were essentially over, but the real work was just beginning. Henderson Motors wasn't just preserved. It was positioned to become the kind of business Grandpa Sam had always envisioned, serving customers with integrity and maintaining standards that honored the automotive heritage he had loved. The phone rang with another customer requesting restoration services, the third such call that day. As I scheduled the appointment and discussed the project details, I realized that success had arrived not through legal maneuvering, but through demonstrating values that customers recognized and appreciated. The Henderson legacy was secure, not because documents said so, but because the work itself proved its worth every single day. 6 months later, I stood behind the mahogany desk in what had once been Marcus's office, now transformed into a workspace that reflected both modern business needs and automotive heritage. The walls displayed framed photographs of restoration projects alongside customer testimonials and industry awards that Henderson Motors had earned under my leadership. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the expanded vintage car display that had become a destination for enthusiasts from across the Midwest. The final ownership hearing had concluded just 3 weeks earlier with Judge Richardson's definitive ruling. The sweat equity provisions had been activated in my favor, granting me controlling interest in Henderson Motors based on my operational contributions and demonstrated business success. Marcus's legal challenges had been definitively rejected, and he had been ordered to pay substantial damages for the unauthorized asset sales and mismanagement that had characterized his brief tenure. But the real validation hadn't come from legal proceedings. It had emerged from the transformation of Henderson Motors into exactly the kind of business Grandpa Sam had always envisioned. Customer satisfaction scores had reached historic highs, with 97% of clients rating our service as exceptional. Revenue had increased by 43% year-over-year, driven by restored customer loyalty and an expanding reputation for quality work that attracted clients from neighboring cities. The Restoration Division 1 had established was booked solid for the next 18 months, with classic car owners willing to wait for our services, rather than trust their precious vehicles to less qualified shops. Each completed project served as advertising for our capabilities, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of reputation and demand that no corporate efficiency program could have achieved. Patricia Williams knocked on my office door, carrying the final legal documents that would formally transfer all business assets to my control. Her expression mixed professional satisfaction with genuine pride in what we had accomplished together against seemingly impossible odds. "The last of the paperwork," she announced, setting the documents on my desk with ceremonial gravity. "As of today, you are the sole owner and operator of Henderson Motors, with all assets, obligations, and opportunities that entails." Signing those documents felt surreal after everything that had transpired since that humiliating day when Marcus had fired me in front of my colleagues. The scared, unemployed mechanic who had discovered her grandfather's hidden resources had evolved into a confident business owner with the skills and vision to honor his legacy while adapting to modern market conditions. "There's one more thing," Patricia added with a mysterious smile. "Check your email." The State Automotive Excellence Council announced their annual awards this morning. I opened my laptop to find notification that Henderson Motors had been selected as Ohio's Outstanding Independent Automotive Service Provider, recognizing our commitment to customer service, technical excellence, and community involvement. The award carried both prestige and practical benefits, including preferred vendor status with several major insurance companies and inclusion in state tourism materials promoting local businesses. But the most meaningful recognition came from sources closer to home. Jerry Martinez, now promoted to service manager, appeared in my doorway with obvious excitement. "Sarah, you need to come downstairs," he said with barely contained enthusiasm. "There's something happening in the showroom that you absolutely have to see." I followed him down to find the showroom filled with familiar faces, customers, employees, community members, and even some former competitors who had come to celebrate what Henderson Motors had become. A banner reading "Congratulations, Sarah Henderson, Businesswoman of the Year," stretched across the display area, flanked by the vintage cars that had become symbols of our commitment to preserving automotive excellence. Mrs. Chen, whose BMW I had diagnosed years earlier, stepped forward as an unofficial spokesperson for the gathering. "We wanted you to know how much this place means to all of us," she said, her voice carrying emotion that reflected the genuine community connections we had rebuilt. "You didn't just save a business. You preserved something that makes our town special." Tom Rodriguez, whose Camaro restoration had been featured in Classic Car Weekly magazine, added his perspective as both customer and automotive enthusiast. "Henderson Motors represents everything that's right about American small business: quality work, honest dealing, and genuine care for customers who become friends rather than just transaction numbers." The sentiment was echoed by other speakers who shared stories about how Henderson Motors had served their families for decades, how the return to traditional service standards had restored their trust, and how our success proved that businesses built on integrity and craftsmanship could thrive in an increasingly corporate marketplace. As the celebration continued, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The devastating firing that had seemed like the end of my career had actually been the catalyst for discovering resources and capabilities I never knew I possessed. Grandpa Sam's hidden preparations had provided tools and opportunities, but success had ultimately depended on proving that his values and approaches were not just sentimentally appealing, but practically superior to corporate alternatives. The phone rang with another restoration inquiry, the fourth such call that day. As I scheduled the consultation and discussed project requirements, I realized that Henderson Motors had evolved beyond merely surviving Marcus's destructive management. We had become the leading independent automotive service provider in the region, with a reputation for excellence that attracted customers who could afford to go anywhere but chose to come here. Derek appeared at the showroom entrance, his expression uncertain, as he observed the celebration honoring the business success that his father had tried desperately to prevent. Our relationship remained complicated, but recent conversations suggested he was beginning to understand the fundamental flaws in Marcus's approach and the strengths of the traditional methods he had dismissed. "Sarah," he said quietly, approaching me during a lull in the festivities, "I wanted to apologize for everything that happened. I was wrong about the business, wrong about your capabilities, and wrong about what made this place special." His acknowledgement meant more than any legal victory or business award, because it represented recognition from someone who had witnessed both management approaches and could evaluate their results objectively. Derek's apology wasn't just personal. It validated the principles and methods that had guided the transformation of Henderson Motors. "I've been thinking about what Grandpa Sam always said about building something that lasts," Derek continued. "Dad focused on quarterly numbers and efficiency metrics, but you've created something that serves the community and honors the craft. That's what real success looks like." As the celebration concluded and guests departed, I walked through the service bays, where technicians were completing the day's final repairs, with the same attention to detail and pride in craftsmanship that had always distinguished Henderson Motors. The difference was that now, these values were formally recognized and supported, rather than undermined by management policies focused solely on profit maximization. The vintage car collection, restored to its full glory and enhanced with new acquisitions, occupied the place of honor in the showroom. Each vehicle told a story about automotive history and the dedication required to preserve mechanical excellence across generations. Children pressed against the display windows, wide-eyed with fascination, just as I had been decades earlier when Grandpa Sam first introduced me to the magic of perfectly restored classic automobiles. That evening, I returned to Grandpa Sam's workshop for a private moment of reflection and gratitude. The tools remained exactly as he had left them, organized with military precision and maintained in perfect condition. But now they were actively used again, supporting restoration projects that honored both automotive heritage and the craftsmanship traditions he had valued above all else. A letter waited on the workbench, addressed to me in familiar handwriting but dated years in the future. Opening it revealed Grandpa Sam's final message, apparently written to be discovered only after the legal battles were resolved and the business was secure under my leadership. "My dearest Sarah," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then you have not only survived the challenge I knew would come, but have proven yourself worthy of the Henderson legacy in ways that transcend blood relationships or legal documents. The tools around you, the business you now control, and the community you serve are all part of a heritage built on values that matter more than profit margins or efficiency metrics." The letter continued with observations about business philosophy and personal character that demonstrated his deep understanding of both my potential and the challenges I would face. True success isn't measured by quarterly earnings or cost reduction achievements. It's measured by the trust customers place in your expertise, the pride employees take in their work, and the positive impact your business has on the community it serves. You have achieved all of these things because you understand what I always tried to teach you, that excellence in any field requires not just technical skill, but genuine care for the people you serve. His final paragraph brought tears to my eyes with its expression of confidence and pride. The Henderson name will continue to represent quality, integrity, and service, because you have proven that these values create lasting success. The business is yours now, not because of legal inheritance, but because you have earned the right to carry forward what we started together. Make it your own, Sarah. But never forget that the foundation of any worthwhile enterprise is the commitment to do excellent work for people who deserve nothing less. I set down the letter and looked around the workshop that had been my classroom for understanding both mechanical excellence and business principles. Every tool represented lessons learned, every project completed had built skills and confidence, every customer relationship had demonstrated the power of combining technical expertise with genuine care for quality outcomes. The transformation from dismissed mechanic to successful business owner had taken less than a year, but it felt like a lifetime of growth and discovery. The legal battles were over, the business was thriving, and the community had embraced Henderson Motors as a symbol of what independent businesses could achieve when they prioritized service over profit and craftsmanship over efficiency. But the most important realization was that success hadn't come from defeating Marcus or winning legal victories. It had emerged from proving that Grandpa Sam's values were not just morally superior, but practically effective in building sustainable business relationships. Customers responded to honest service, employees thrived under management that respected their skills, and the community supported businesses that contributed to local prosperity rather than merely extracting profit. As I locked the workshop and prepared to leave, my phone rang with yet another restoration inquiry. A collector in Tennessee had heard about our work through automotive networks and wanted to discuss a comprehensive restoration of a 1970 Plymouth Cuda that had been in his family for decades. The project would take 6 months and generate revenue that exceeded what Marcus had collected from selling 3 vintage cars below market value. The irony was perfect. Marcus's efficiency-focused approach had treated automotive heritage as commodity inventory to be liquidated quickly for cash. The traditional approach I had restored treated each vehicle as a unique piece of history deserving preservation through expert craftsmanship. The financial results spoke for themselves. Quality work commanded premium prices and created customer relationships that generated ongoing business for years. Driving home through downtown Millbrook, I passed the small businesses and modest neighborhoods that comprised our community. Henderson Motors served these people not just as an automotive service provider but as a symbol that local businesses could compete successfully against corporate chains by offering something that efficiency and standardization could never match: personal attention, expert service, and genuine commitment to customer satisfaction. The vintage Mustang that had once represented Grandpa Sam's vision now symbolized my own commitment to carrying forward the values and standards that had made Henderson Motors special. Every mile driven was a reminder that success measured by community impact and customer loyalty was more meaningful and sustainable than any quarterly profit target or efficiency metric. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, as Henderson Motors continued growing its reputation and expanding its services. But tonight, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from honoring a legacy while making it your own, from proving that traditional values could generate modern success, and from building something that would serve the community for generations to come. The Henderson name would endure not because of legal documents or inheritance rights, but because the business it represented had earned its place through excellent work, honest dealing, and unwavering commitment to the customers and community it served. That was Grandpa Sam's true legacy, and now it was mine to continue. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.